Hello everyone, Cherry here. It's been a while since I've done my last fanfiction reading, but right now it's really important because, oh my gosh. Today is a very special episode because this fanfiction was brought to you by one of my subscribers, Des. It's a Runaway War Au fanfic, and oh my gosh, I think this is the first fanfic I've ever gotten in forever. So this is very special, so I'm going to read it. All credits go to Des. So make sure to go show them some love. Anyway, on to the fanfiction reading. Betrayal is one of the things that changes the way in your life, for better or for worse. After all, you can learn that trust and respect goes a long way once you've earned it, rather than it being forced upon you by the Newton star. Unfortunately for Ruby, though, it appeared as though he'd had the negative side of this betrayal. Was it karma or resentment? He couldn't tell anymore. At this rate, he may never be able to. Especially since he was trapped in a comatose state of mind, floating in an endless abyss of emptiness and black, being able to hear but not see or speak. How has that happened, though? Hey, Ruby? Come here for a second. I found something you might want to look at. Eclipse called out, his gaze fixated on a book of some sort. He was examining it in silence as he awaited for Ruby's arrival, adjusting his glasses as he stared into the book title for the first time, making sure it was the right book he turned with. He took a soft breath as he waited. It didn't take long until the other animatronic arrived. Racing through the door, Ruby swiftly walked over to Eclipse, grinning maniacally. "Ooh, what you got there?" He tiptoed in an attempt to see over Eclipse's shoulder, which unfortunately failed. Eclipse was admittedly taller than the other. The red animatronic quickly wiped a bit of blood from his cheek using his sleeve. He may or may not have committed a few crimes earlier. "Looks cool." Eclipse held his breath as he spoke, attempting to keep his composure. His focus and attention was all on what he was about to do, and the possible results. "Do you mind helping me finding the other book? I can't find the stupid second one." Staring at the number 1 on his book. "This place is massive, too." Eclipse gestured to the rows of books and such. Ruby nodded, smiling and holding up a thumbs up. "Sure. Oh, want to find Lunar later? I have a few games in mind." He snickered, which was a pretty bad sign when you thought of who was saying it. Poor Lunar. He had gotten the bad end of this altered universe. Ruby did a small twirl for some reason before rushing away to help his brother. Eclipse watched as Ruby ran off. Eclipse sighed as he let out a breath that he'd been holding the entire time and closed the book, carrying it with him as he began swiftly walking towards a specific direction. He had memorized the exact location in which Ruby kept the star. After all, Ruby had shown him now that he gained his trust. He entered the room, which was primarily quartz with black marble flooring. In the middle of the small room was a cage that held the star. His gaze drifted to the door as he closed it, locking it in the process. Eclipse set the book down, taking out a key that he had pickpocketed from Ruby only moments earlier. He began unlocking it as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Ruby had just found the second book. He quickly rushed to where Eclipse had been before stopping dead in his tracks, noticing that the older animatronic had completely disappeared. "Eclipse, I found the book. Where are you?" he called out, worried. His usual sadistic grin faltered, forming a frown. His footsteps began to get increasingly louder and closer. Not enough time, not enough time. He moved swiftly as he unlatched the door, causing a loud slam. He threw open the cage door and snatched a Newton star, now holding it in the palm of his hand. The footsteps eventually stopped. Ruby stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with horror and shock. He began stammering, seemingly worried. A feeling of betrayal and hatred began bubbling up inside him. He'd done everything for Eclipse, just to be his brother. "Eclipse, what are you doing?" he demanded, stifling a sob. Everything was going wrong in a span of a few minutes. Ruby could feel his eyes become watery. Well, technically oily since they cried oil. Eclipse quickly turned around. As soon as he heard Ruby, his eyes widened. He quickly hid his fear, taking a sharp intake of breath as he took a step closer. The older animatronic glared down at the other, holding the Newton star in one hand and adjusting his glasses with the other. "You can't keep doing this forever, Ruby. I know what you've done. To the universe, to Lunar, to Sun, to Moon, you..." He took another step closer to Ruby, his eyes filled with hatred. Ruby teared up as he shrunk back. "It was for both of us. Don't you love me as your brother? We have the entire world together, you know? That's what you always wanted. Power, wasn't it? He retorted, weakly crossing his arms. He stared up at Eclipse, oil beginning to drip from his teary eyes. Eclipse scoffed, turning away from Ruby.
You're not my brother! You've done nothing! Nothing! We were never brothers, Ruby! You thought you were in control here? A puppeteer to his puppet? Well, you're not, and you never will be! He hissed with hatred. He knew that he shouldn't have snapped at Ruby like this, but he couldn't keep his emotions back at that very moment. Ruby took a step back, hesitant to do something. He knew that he should defend himself, but he didn't want to hurt Eclipse in the process. They were brothers. They would always be brothers. Unlike that lunar freak. Right? I'm done with your shenanigans, Ruby. Eclipse deadpanned as he held up the Newton star with both his hands. Holding it up to the ceiling, a beam of light began to come out of it, emitting a bright white glow. Ruby's eyes widened.
No, Eclipse! You can't do this! I did all of this for you! You can't get rid of everything we built just like that, right?
He shouted, desperately trying to convince Eclipse to stop. Maybe I can. The beam of light getting brighter, he quickly turned his gaze away, as to not become blind because of the bright light. His glasses beginning to fall off, the star shaking in his hands as it used its inviolable magic to turn the world back to normal. Brother, no! Ruby yelled desperately, suddenly lunging at Eclipse in an attempt to get him to stop. Unfortunately, it was too late. The light grew more and more, making their visions white. That was all they could see before... nothing. Ruby drifted lifelessly in a void of emptiness, nothingness even. He felt as though he was drifting in and out of consciousness. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe, he couldn't do anything. All he could do was hear. Hearing those who had abandoned him celebrate his disappearance. Hearing them cry and try to forget the trauma he had inflicted on them. Ruby was stuck completely in a comatose state he could not control, only being able to hear, thinking endlessly for the rest of eternity. Every regret, his remorse, even the guilt of it all. Everything would find him eventually. But no one else would. Nobody would remember him when he was banished, would they? No, he had been sent to an abyss far away from his siblings. He'd become a forgotten memory. Family. Eclipse had fainted after he used his star, sat up against a pillar of some sorts. His eyes fluttered open as he examined his surroundings. He was... at home? My head. He grimaced, covering his ears with his hands. The animatronic's consciousness eventually came back. Eclipse had been trapped somewhere and found a Newton star and did something. He could remember a person, but who? The memory was foggy, like a forgotten one he had a long time ago. He stood up from the pillar, wearing his usual clothing. His eyes darted around the room before noticing Lunar, Sun, and Moon chatting to each other as always. They seemed happy, ecstatic even, as if nothing had happened. He stared blankly at them for a moment before walking away, entering his room to clear his thoughts. It appeared as though Eclipse was the only one who had a vague memory of what happened, likely because he was the one who banished Ruby in the first place. He sat down on his bed, crossing his legs as he did so. There was no sound in the room, except for the soft whirring of the animatronic's fan on the back of his head, and the quiet yet steady breathing. Eclipse took a sharp intake of breath before rubbing his temples, thinking. A small glowing white orb of light sat in the corner of his room. The orb in question had a shocking resemblance to a star.